Now I'm really pleased to introduce to you all Mark Armitage. Mark's a senior director at the Global Government's Grants Office at Johnson & Johnson Innovation, and he'll talk about their approach. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. I'm obviously going to talk about this from a point of view of large pharma, large biotech perspective, but probably what I am going to cover will hopefully be relevant, because even if you're at a relatively early stage of development of a company, small biotech, small startup, you will be collaborating with larger partners somewhere, often in the product development process. So what I'd like to do is talk you through a little bit of that. My background is originally in genetics and cell biology and immunology, but I've been working in this space in terms of interacting with governments on R&D funding, infrastructure costs, etc., for over 20 years now, and that includes the NIH, the DoD, BARDA, as well as a lot of European funding mechanisms such as IMI, IHI, Horizon Europe, etc. So quite a varied experience in those sorts of spaces. Most of my experience has been in infectious diseases and vaccines, but also some work in regenerative medicine, tissue engineering, those sorts of fields. So hopefully what I'll cover are just some of the sort of key watch outs or learnings that I think I've picked up over the years of working in this space. So we can jump to the next slide. So you'll be pleased to hear I only have one slide, but I'll talk through each of these points in turn. And really, as I said, this is looking at sort of practical considerations for how to take forward a project, not so much how to apply for an award, but once you get an award or you're working with a larger partner who has an award, how are you likely to want to operate? The first of those is to consider, are you joining a consortium, or is it going to be a one-to-one type contract? If it's a consortium, that comes with its own special needs, its own special unique requirements. If it's one-to-one, also great, but that also requires that you behave in a slightly different way, because if you are the prime contractor, you're going to be held responsible and you're going to be held accountable for delivering against that contract, not only yourself, but any sub-awardees that you might have. So that's obviously very, very important as well. The other part here is to also consider what are you contributing? So are you putting in a single asset, a single compound? Is it a library that you're putting in, which is going to be screened? Are you putting FTEs in? Is it just know-how, cash funding? Some contract types, some awards might require a cost share, and indeed having a cost share might make you more attractive to receive that funding in the first place. But the key thing around this is to make sure that you and the company are comfortable committing those assets, those contributions for the duration of the project. And that can often be quite tricky. If you're a small startup, you may not have that longevity behind you. You may not have all of that, the financial security to go forward with all of that for, say, a 5-year program. Equally, if you're a large pharma partner, there can be changes in strategic direction that happen within that period. So again, something that whichever company is applying for this, something you need to think hard about and consider, can you commit for the full duration of the project? The next one on the list is to think about having clearly defined roles for each of the participants, and that may change at different stages of the project, whether it's early stage discovery, preclinical, CMC, all the way into the clinical studies, and it may not be the same participant or the same group which is responsible or in the lead at every single stage. So again, make sure that is clear and understood by all parties, and you understand that up front. The next part is around, and the last 3 points here probably start to link together, and that is around the decision making. So it's going to be very important that you understand how decisions are going to be made within this consortium or within this group, even if it's a one-to-one transaction or it's a part of a broader consortium. Understand who has that responsibility for decision making, who the voting members might be, how those decisions will get taken. The other part here is the part that people often get most hung up on is considering the obligations. And the one that most people typically focus on is IP, but that's only one of a number of areas that need to be discussed. IP is obviously critically important, particularly if you're looking to progress something commercially. But there's also decisions and obligations that may need to be made around manufacturing. Is there an impact on pricing, margin rights? The other key element is around data and data rights. Typically, an academic collaborator is looking to try and publish results, get papers generated from it. The commercial party is often interested in protecting IP and understanding how that data can be used for regulatory filings to support other applications they may need to make. So again, make sure that those are clearly defined up front and you understand how that's going to work so it avoids any frustration down the road. And the final part I'd like to just touch on here is around flexibility. Because this is R&D, we know that it doesn't always work to plan. Indeed, 80–90% of what we do is likely to not lead to the results that we anticipated or take us in a different direction. So although you're often looking at negotiating an award, an agreement up front, and everybody's very excited to get started, also think about the way in which you may need to seek change in that direction or the scope. And does it allow you to change the budget, or are you going to have to go back to partners and understand how that's going to change? And then finally, the last thing I would say about this is view this as these sorts of collaborations. The way I often view them is view it as an investment in the future, and view it as an investment in the relationship. It's not just the money, the funding that you're after. What you're really trying to do is develop a long-term relationship with that funder, with that partner that you can then rely on in the future. And just to give you one example, I was involved in developing an Ebola vaccine, and that project started out nearly 15 years ago. It started off as a CRADA with the NIH. So neither party was putting money in, we were putting assets in and sharing data. That then led to an NIH award, which eventually led to a BARDA award. And finally, that led to the product being WHO approved and approved by EMEA in Europe. So that vaccine is now being used in Africa in the more recent Ebola outbreaks. So again, just to give you a feel that it's not just not necessarily a one-off, it's a long-term relationship, which is in the benefit of both parties. So I'll stop there and hand over to the next speaker.
Mark, thank you for sharing that. Are these grants primarily oriented then towards academics and non-commercial enterprises, or can a early-stage biotech company apply for this?
It very much depends. A lot of my experience has been with the NIH, with BARDA, DoD, and it depends on the type of contracting mechanism. If it's a large OTA, other transactional authority, it typically tends to be large pharma. But there are other types of awards that can go ahead, and I think Minky and Laura will be touching on those as well. I've typically worked with contracts, being from a large organization rather than grants, but each one has its own specific peculiarities. So again, I think to what Minky was saying, reach out to the program officer as early as possible in the process.
Okay, but you're speaking in this case primarily of grants from government, not grants from Johnson & Johnson.
Correct, grants from government, yes.
Great, thank you. Because Johnson & Johnson also has an equity investment arm and does a bunch of funding of early stage projects too.
We do.
With very different sets of terms than these.
Exactly, okay. Yes. Most of my experience has been with either NGOs or government funding.
Okay, yeah, we have lots of experience with your equity investment partners. Okay.